Hello everyone, welcome to Supporters Watching and thank you for joining us. I'm delighted to be joined here by Huddersfield Town Sporting Director Chris Markham and Head Coach Liam Manning. Thank you gentlemen for taking the time to speak to us this evening. And thank you to the supporters who sent in questions in your hundreds for this evening's Q&A via We Are Terriers. We've sifted through all of the questions and picked out the ones that we thought came up most often. So apologies to those who don't get their questions asked or answered, but we're doing our best to get through as much as we can. So without any further ado, Liam, I'll come to you first. This is from Wayne France. He says, "Why did you decide to drop down to League One with Huddersfield Town, when with your CV you'd probably get another job at Championship level, given the job you did at Bristol City?"
Yeah, I think she was out of work, had a couple of months in terms of to probably reflect, to rest a little bit, to spend a bit of time with the family. And then I was really conscious of what was next for me in terms of off the back of obviously a tough period, making sure that the next one I was to take was, somewhere that kind of matched in terms of values, the people, the plan, just everything around it was at a similar spot to me and would allow me to kind of jump back in and progress. And I think, when I met with Chris, when we had a chat, I think in terms of the potential here, the current playing squad, the fan base, the facilities, everything around it is way above League One level. So there was the short-term piece of what I think the team's capable of, but then there's also the medium, longer-term piece, which is really important for me in terms of where the club can go. And that for me, obviously having had a tough period, I think the club similarly, obviously in recent years had a tough period. So it felt like a really good time to join a terrific football club with a really exciting future.
And from Callum Greenwood, he follows up by saying, "Are you happy with the way your opening fixtures have gone? And has any of the team caught your eye in those performances?"
Yeah, I think I'm always going to be greedy and want more, right? I think we chase that constantly. So the first 3 games were obviously fantastic too, being at home with the adversity that we faced, the suffering that the lads had to go through was, it spoke a lot about the group and the culture that the lads have. And then after that, there's still so many positives, I think, in terms of elements to the performance, and naturally I think there's pieces where we'll always look to improve. Obviously the weekend being a frustrating, disappointing one, but when I look across the 5 games in the league, I'm talking to have 3 wins, a draw and 1 loss. I think it's a solid start, but I still think there's a huge amount more to come from the group, definitely.
We've spoken at press conferences, Liam, about the first 2 games you've had a couple of red cards and that changes the plan, and then Peterborough play a very specific way, Stevenage play a very specific way, you've got the trophy in there as well. Is there a long-term playing identity for the first team that we might see develop over time?
Yeah, for me, how we work I think is really important. That I think giving players, there's a balance to giving them structure and clarity, but also elements of freedom. I think, especially attacking players, I don't want to put shackles on them. I think we sign players because they're good at something. I think it's my job, our job as a staff, to get them in positions to bring their strengths. So naturally, I think you have the challenge when you come in and obviously for a reason, but working with a group which I know a lot about in terms of having coached against many or worked with some previously. So I have that added insight. I think naturally the team will evolve, just in terms of differences in ideas of coaches, sporting directors, of where we think we can take it to. But definitely in terms of when we do get more time in the grass and we can make certain tweaks to certain areas, I'm confident in definitely evolving a real clear playing style which excites the fans. I think that's the big bit as well. I think it's one to first and foremost we have to win games, but there's also a certain way to do it, and that for me is, I've spoken a lot about with yourself around being underpinned by all in behaviourally, and then after that I think it's then in terms of to get people off their seats. Don't want to be a team that sits back. We want to play on the front foot. We want to be aggressive, and we want to be attack minded. There things that get thrown around all the time that take a little bit of patience and time to develop.
To bring you in, Chris, I mean, we spoke about that, didn't we, after you pointedly, and that was something that you were looking for, someone with that identity.
Yeah, well, I think we got to the point where I think I've spoke about this before. It wasn't, is Liam Manning a good manager? I think there's been enough evidence to suggest that he is. It's around where we aligned in what we saw the future to be from a football perspective. Really good conversations about all his other experiences and how adaptable he's been, particularly when you first join a new club, inheriting a team that he hasn't built. How can you get the best out of that team in the short term, and then more importantly, build towards a future that we can all get excited about as town fans and people that work for the club. And yeah, so that stylistically, that's really important, obviously for ourselves, but also hopefully for the fans as well.
It's Lee Smith with the last question, just to give that name check. This is from Mark Harrison, and it's kind of for both of you. Chris, I'll come to you first, because I know you've got the analytics background, but Mark says, with data and video technology increasingly prevalent in the modern game, would you say that you use this extensively? Are you a bit more old school? Do you use the eye test? Is it a bit of both? Also, what information do you get from the laptops in the dugouts during the game, Liam?
Yeah, look, in terms of, I think, obviously my background, people would maybe automatically assume that I'm heavily data focused. I think it's part of a wider decision-making process. When we're looking at anything in football, I always like to have the idea that you've got as many lenses on things as possible, so you're getting a more clear, holistic view of the situation. Data is clearly one lens that's important, as is video, but certainly like experiences, feel, the human relationships, like there for me where the real gains can be made. And when you're looking at then data and other performance aids, they are where you then get the little margins. I think if you don't have the right people, and this is where we were really aligned quickly, if you don't have the right people, then all the other things become a little bit less impactful. So hopefully we're trying to build for over the short term and mid-term future, make sure we've got all the right people here, and I think hopefully we've made a good start.
What's your view on it, Liam?
Yeah, it definitely plays a part in it. I think there's a perception that it drives decisions, which it doesn't. It's there to inform and support. I think for me, I like to know as much information possible before making a decision. But a big part of that will definitely be my eyes, my gut, which I think you develop over time and experience. The older you get, the more games you do, the more experiences you have. I think your gut, your feeling, your eyes play a huge part, and then around it, we use video. Obviously, it's a huge part of it now. I think you only have to turn Sky Sports on every night to see something being overanalyzed on TV constantly. So we definitely use video. I think it's really powerful for development. I think I can talk to a player and give him an opinion, but if I can sit down and show him, it's a lot more powerful. So we use a huge amount of video. There's also then a blend. I think you can give them too much. So my job again, I think on that front is to sometimes, rein in the staff a little bit we've given them too much, let them breathe a little bit, let them go and play, because, what you see, it doesn't always feel like that on the pitch, so they have to, we have to have players that, again, can see it, but then, when the game starts, they have to, recall that information in a certain way. And then in terms of during game, we have the iPad. I think I look at it sporadically, but I think we have one of the staff sits up in the stands,
right near me,
right near you, to get a different lens that he's connected to steady on the bench. James Krause, who's worked with me in numerous places, as you know, when you're up higher to when you're pitch side, it's a completely different view, so you can see the spaces and shapes and what teams are doing a little bit different. So staff will keep an eye on that on the bench. I tend to look at it probably when something goes a little bit wrong. Why has that happened? Because again, it kind of answers a question for me very quickly. But for me, I like to live in the game. I like to be present. I like to emotionally be involved in the game. And then Martin does a terrific job of then filtering the information that I need as and when. And that for me is probably the most powerful way of working.
I think that's the key thing. Sorry, Steve. I think it's about dosage.
Yeah.
You don't want to have too little, and you've got to up and manage that dosage for players, for games, for moments, for staff. So I think that's the main thing. We've got all the tools. It's give them too much, you can kill them. Give them not enough, they're not going to get the help they need. So it's a real, even when using data and video and all these, for example, you've still got to have that touch as to what's too much and what's not enough, and that's on performance and obviously recruitment as well.
Okay. Shifting on to a little bit the future and what the targets for the season might be, what the plans for the summer might be as well. Chris, I'm sure this one was asked a million times. We've picked out Wayne Francis' version again. If we don't get promoted this year, will we have a budget next season to support Liam in the summer market for a push to get top two?
Yeah, look, I think one thing we can all be clear on is Kevin has got, his ambition for the club and the resource and what he's put into this club so far. As we can't question that. Obviously, it's our job to try and deliver as much return on investment as we can for him, and we're working hard to do that. At the moment, obviously, January's just finished and change of manager, but the conversations are already ongoing for both League One and for the Championship in terms of modelling what that looks like and making sure, Kevin's overall aim here is for us to be as competitive as possible. and those are the same conversations that we're having now. And it's a bit more difficult, as I've said in the past, where I was at my last club as well. Nearly every single season is you running two plans, one for the outcome you're hoping for, which is promotion, and then the other one is obviously for getting better, even if we're in this league again next year. So yeah, I'm confident that it's allowing us to plan in a really specific way to make sure we keep getting better.
And we know that we've seen in January a couple of players have gone out on loan as well. Not necessarily them, but there is potentially room for manoeuvre on players going out as well, isn't there, with help raise some funds?
Yeah, we've got to look to evolve the squad. Obviously, there's not many players who are out of contract, which gives us some continuity, but also an opportunity to freshen things up. And we're still both quite new into being here, so we're constantly looking at how we can monitor the players and seeing how we respond in different situations and what that evolution might look like, for both positive and negative reasons. If somebody does really well, it might be hard to keep them. If somebody gets a bad injury, you've got to evolve. So it's a constant monitoring and adapting, really.
Yeah. And as for sort of targets for this season, I'll run together two from Doug Barnett and Alan Swift. Is there a minimum target, especially with the Virtue Trophy now gone? Is there a minimum target for this season? And from Alan, do you think automatic promotion spots are achievable this season at this point?
I can take that one. Look, I think for me the aim is we've got 14 left to finish as high as we possibly can. I think I'm not going to sit here and squash dreams, because I'm saying to the lads, look, the aim is to pick up as many points as we can, and I think that the bit for us then has to be on that game by game focus. Like I said, I joined 6 games ago because I believe that the squad's got the potential to do it. So again, I think all my energy is now making sure that we give absolutely everything to do it. And when I look at the quality in the group, when I look at some of the bodies we've got coming back as well, I think in terms of arguably will be like new signings, I think that'll give a bit of a lift as well and add competition and different qualities to the squad. So for me, we'll be doing absolutely everything to finish as high as we can, and that for me, there's no reason why we can't move up.
Okay, fantastic. Chris, a couple for you, and we'll go back to transfers and some of those outs that we had in January. This one from Mike Potts first. Did bringing Liam in affect any of the January targets or the signings that you ended up making?
No, I wouldn't say it affected it. Listen, I'm also not going to say it's ideal to change head coaches during January. It does make things a little bit more difficult and maybe puts a little bit of a time lag on things while we understand what it looks like, what becomes available. And January is always a difficult market because it is constantly adapting all the time. But no, I wouldn't say it changed dramatically what we were looking at. I think between Lee and Liam, we were both aligned on what we think the squad was missing and what we wanted to try to bring in to make it better and hopefully leave January in a better position than what we entered it, despite obviously a bit of a difficult background. So no, it certainly didn't alter targets as such. I think we were all aligned on what that looked like.
What's the process like between the two of you? Is it who has the final say? Who presents the players? Who's bringing stuff to the table? Is it very
Look, I think we spoke about this early on when we met as well. I'm clear on that obviously the key part of this, and it's the bit that I'm really looking forward to getting into, is the building of the profiles underneath the umbrella of how we want to play. So each position, what is it we're looking for? What do we want the squad composition to look like? And they're sort of the nerdy conversations that I think we both enjoy. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to spending the time, really getting deep into that. Because I think once you get that right, and where I've been successful before is if you get that right and you're really clear about what we both want to look for, it's then mine and the recruitment team's job to go and find them, bring the best 2, 3, 4 options, and us sit down and go through them together. I am certainly not ever going to be somebody, and I don't think it works, when it's forced upon the head coach or the manager. Like, it has to be a joint decision. These are the profiles that we've agreed on. Here's the ones that fit that profile. And then an open discussion, and it's got to be signed off by the person who's ultimately going to have to use the players and stand there and take the heat and be on right live in the game. And I think if you get to the point where that is forced upon them, then it just that alignment isn't there and it doesn't work.
Yeah, no, very similar. I think it is a collaboration. I think the most effective way of working is that I think it does start with the end goal in mind of what do you want to look like, what do you want to, how do you want to play, what is our identity, as you asked a minute ago, and then once you've done that, you can work for what have you got in the squad currently, what do you maybe need to tweak and add in the future to get it closer to that. And then it's the way we work. There's obviously a certain capacity of time that we have, so put trust in the recruitment department, but then heavily involved regularly for us to sit down and to challenge that. And I think that's a really, really important bit, that it's both ways, that you have a tight relationship, understanding that you've got the same goal in mind, but if you want to be successful, you want to perform to a high level, you have to challenge, which we had a couple of good chats in January on that front of to-ing and fro-ing, thoughts, feelings, opinions, and then once you leave the room for me, you're all in on the decision that you make.
Chris, a really, really common question, one of the ones we got the most, was about Joe Taylor's departure for Wigan Athletic on loan. What was the thinking behind that? Do they have an option to buy him in the summer?
First of all, they don't have an option to buy him in the summer. I've been clear on Joe in the past. Joe's a player that I've admired for quite a while. Obviously, when I was at my previous club, he had the really good season. That's 2 seasons ago now, where he split across League One and League Two. Played 46 games across the season, scored over 20 goals, and he was on the radar of everybody. Since then, things haven't gone as Joe would have liked, and that period now is over 18 months ago. So with the type of player that Joe is, with the type of game that he plays, we felt that the best way to get return on our investment, Joe's with us till 2029, is to get him regular game time. Last season, I think he played something like 700 minutes, which is nowhere near enough. And obviously, coming into January, he wasn't making the squad. And look, it's a two-way thing. We wanted Joe to go and get regular minutes and show what he could do. And also, Joe wanted to get regular minutes to show what he could do. So it was a two-way thing. We all felt at that time it was the best decision for all involved. He's gone there and started well in terms of goals. And we hope to see that continue as well, and it enabled us to evolve our strike force as well, and we're hopeful that he has a good end to the season, and obviously we're hopeful that we have a good end to the season. Joe Taylor's somebody who is part of this club going forwards, and I know Liam views it that way as well. I think he reached out to him.
Yeah, I called him a few weeks ago, I had a chat with him. So obviously decision made before obviously I had any chats talk. So when I then came in, it was for me important that he knows that I'll be keeping an eye on him, and obviously I know him and his background, but one that we'll continue to monitor, I'll stay in touch with, and it's one of those that you hope he goes and does well.
Yeah, and you've subsequent, people, when unfortunately then Bojan's gone down and Alfie May's got suspended, but you've got Ryan Hardy in, he's hopefully not too far off, so you happy with the striking options that you've got available to you?
Yeah, I think Ryan coming back will be a key piece as well, and obviously towards the back end as well, Bojan coming back as well will be a big help. So I think when you look at it, we've got some options, we've got some slightly different profiles, which I think we've had chats on. I think it's important that you can make changes and tweaks in game to give a different feel, so problems in different ways. So I think Ryan's close, and again I think Alfie back after his suspension. That's the bit that kind of I have to remember as well from the Bradford game. The team looked very different already, mainly due to a couple of injuries and a suspension, which is difficult to control. So again, I think when we start getting some of those players back and we get them in a good spot physically, the team's going to continue to evolve.
And Chris, staying on January, a departure that unfortunately was out of your hands. Chris Sav asked about Leo Castledine. Were you in for Leo Castledine? Were you looking to sign him on a permanent? What was the situation with that?
Yeah, we had a conversation. We asked that question. We definitely were in that discussion, but clearly, again, as we just mentioned about Joe there, I think it's easy to forget that the player has a significant say in this as well. We wanted to be in and around that discussion, but it came to what it came down to was Leo wanted to challenge himself in the Championship, and we obviously had to respect that. He did fantastically well for us while he was here, and we had to sort of reluctantly, obviously it wasn't the best news we could have wished for in January, but we had to adapt quickly, and it gives an opportunity for others, and that's what we're focusing on now. And
on Ryan Hardy, who's come in, is there an option for him for a permanent move?
No, there's no option on a permanent move. I think obviously that's in Wrexham's hands, and I think one thing that we are clear on though is that hopefully if he helps us achieve our aims, and depending where it's at with Wrexham, hopefully we can put ourselves across in a good light, and if he does, then who knows, in the summer it's certainly not off the table, but it's not something we have an option for at this moment in time, no.
For the pair of you on scouting as well now, when you're looking at a player who you think you might be interested in buying or taking on loan, do you go and see them live still? Do you do just the video, just the data? We talked a bit about the data and the video, but do you physically go and watch those players still?
Yeah, I think, look, for me, again, it comes back to a very similar answer to the previous question, but one that's probably a bit more closer to my heart, really. There was some, myths around my last role where it was we just signed players off data. Like, that couldn't be further from the truth. Like, probably one that you'd never sign somebody just based off that. It's a way of evaluating and getting people into the filter, for sure, and then obviously it's a mixture of video and live in-person scouting to make sure that the decision's made with, as many lenses on as possible. But the idea that you would just sign players based off data and not having got the feel for them, having watched them, is just, it's certainly not something that I would subscribe to, and pretty passionate about that.
Okay.
Yeah, so similar. I think trying to get live eyes is really important. You can watch video, but I think in terms of feeling the atmosphere, the energy, the noise the crowd makes and how players respond to that, the momentum swings in game, which I don't think you always get on TV and in video, I think. So yeah, for me, as Chris said there, it's trying to cover all bases, whether it be live, whether it be video, whether it be data. For me, it's a combination of all of them.
I think finally on transfers, there has been a lot of frustration over the past few years from the fans. I think understandably, about some players that have come in and not lived up to their reputations. This is from Charlotte. She asked, do you feel there are identifiable issues which cause players to come to Huddersfield and fall short of their expected potential? And if so, is there a plan on how to counter that and make town a place where people can come to shine?
Look, I think it's obviously, I can't really comment too much over the past couple of years in terms of if that's the time frame. I think in general, there are one of the hardest things about recruitment is around that fit, that alignment. Like, I think we can all, everyone in the room can identify who's a good player or not, who has talent, who has ability. I think the real key to recruitment is trying to identify how that will translate into the environment that you're bringing them into. So whether that be, culturally, whether that be style of play, whether that be, their personal life, relocating. There's so many variables that affect how successful the transfer is. And look, expectation based from fees, expectation coming to a big club like this. You don't truly always know how that's going to react. I don't think we're the only club in the country or even in the north of England that have that problem. And, I think a commitment that we've got to make as a club is that we not just sign the right players. Like, I think we should be recruiting players once we sign them every day, putting the right services around them, putting the right support around them, whether that be coaching, sports science, medicine, like I said, all the off-the-field stuff that I hope we do a good job of. We're trying to give them the best chance to shine, and that's something that we want to constantly keep looking at and getting better at. But if spending money definitely correlated to success, it wouldn't be the exciting game that we know it as. Yeah.
I suppose my biggest bit is around the culture we create. How do you get the best out of somebody? And I think that's the skill set, right? Which one needs a bit of a kick up the backside? Which one needs an arm around them? The cliches of football, but I do think it's creating that culture where you understand how do you get the best out of people. So I think I spoke about it a minute ago. You bring somebody in because they're good at something. How do you get them in a position or an area of the pitch where they can bring out that strength? And I think that with then the balance of who they play with to complement each other's strengths and weaknesses is hugely important. So I think there's a lot that goes into building a strong, successful team. It's not just recruiting good individual players. I think it is very much that. Yeah, how do you work off of each other? How do I pick a team where certain profiles work best with others? Which, if you think around the history of the game, you can go back through numerous pairings and partnerships, whether it be a front two, whether it be a right back and a wide right that link well together. And I think that's the key to it. One, creating the right culture, but then two, recruiting the right profiles that balance off each other. Definitely. I
think that's absolutely crucial. That last part, and that's the bit where we're looking forward to getting into that and what that looks like here for us. And I think, that the idea of recruitment is just about signing a lot of good players isn't necessarily as simple as that. Is a huge amount of cohesion that goes into what is a very obviously a complex sport in terms of how free flowing and how much variation there can be from game to game.
Okay, thank you very much. Next one, the academy has been a big talking point over the past few years. Obviously, you've gone back recently from the B team model over the past couple of years to introducing the younger age groups. Andy Firth asks, with the investment from the owner into the academy, how do you see the transition of players when stepping up into the first team? How does that work? Will the selected players train with the first team squad as part of that process?
Yeah, look, I can speak about that first part. Obviously, we're already starting to see that hopefully a little bit. Obviously, Kamashi is one that's there. Obviously, Jacob Chapman is playing EFL minutes. I think that's something that we want to focus on around how we can make sure that we get as many of our academy players playing EFL minutes. It might not always be that they come straight into our first team, as you've seen with Tom at Notts County, who we're keeping a really close eye on and really pleased with his development there. Yeah. I think if we can prove that we're getting players from our academy that can consistently demand EFL minutes, and hopefully as we progress up the pyramid, that becomes a bigger part of their development. For them, when they do come back to us, they're ready to go. I think at my previous club we had success with that as well. So I think that's a really good indicator of, we'll be keeping an eye on that, how many EFL minutes we're getting. In terms of, the investment, again, it's been brilliant, what we've had from Kevin and what's gone into the academy. I mean, I think that's a real positive that I've been really positively surprised with. Obviously, Worthy's done a great job there. He's really instilled that. And when you watch us play, you can tell that there's an identity and it means something to the players, which is really important. And I think having that, the idea around Steady coming back is to he's someone that also understands the value of that. He'll be a really good relationship. He's got a strong relationship with Tommy. He obviously knows Worthy really well as well. So that was all part of that. We're trying to build the whole club here, and I think already, and I'll leave it for Liam to talk about how we've already sort of seen a couple of lads training.
Yeah, I think firstly I understand the importance of it. Obviously, my background, having worked in academies for probably the best part of 14, 15 years, so I understand the importance in terms of the feeling for everybody involved with the academy to see that progress. I think when me and Chris spoke, I think one of the first things for me recruitment wise is you look in house. I think any player that you that's got the potential, don't block it, find out first, because I do think what you naturally get with players that come through your academy, they have a real affiliation to the club, so culturally they understand it, they have a different level of emotional investment to somebody potentially joining externally. So for me it's very much that of look in house first, because the lad's strengths and weaknesses as well, and you've had time to develop them and put in some of the traits that you want. It's always then, if you can't do that, then look beyond. But I think what I've seen so far, we've probably had 4 or 5 different lads training with us over the very few sessions that we've had since being here, and been really impressed with what I've seen so far. I'm actually going to go and watch the game tomorrow. Coming last week, but unfortunately due to the rain again, it was obviously called off. So for me, it's a really important relationship that we work closely with. And like I said, we've had some really good chats already with the academy staff, and it's a relationship I think that's hugely important for the club as well.
And with that move back to the full age range, Richard Waller asks, how long will it take for some of the more homegrown players to start appearing for the first team? Are we still a little way off that yet?
Yeah, I think, like I said, we've already started seeing the shoots of that. I think as we become, as the recruitment strategies and some of that cohort that we've invested in, and we continue to, obviously there might be slight time lag on that. I don't want to put any loads of pressure on the young lads coming through now that we expect to see any radical, we're going to have X amount of minutes or whatever. Yeah. I think I'm very wary of that. We've got to let it develop organically.
It's a young group, isn't it?
It's a young group. Yeah.
They're called the under 21s, but a lot of them 18, 19.
Well, it's a really talented group, I must admit. Like I said, I've been really impressed with it, and I think we had some conversations in January where actually, should we, have we been impressed enough, and what do we see from that group to have them supplement training and be in and around the squad. So I think that speaks volumes, and it is going back to the appointment of Liam. Again, that was another tick in our box around somebody who has worked in youth development with success and knows what that space looks like, because I think there's quite a lot of evidence out there that once you've worked in that space, you probably have more of the opinion of, let's not block the talent. Mm-hmm. So when we were looking for the right head coach, a lot of things came into that equation, and that was one of them.
And how much is there, this is from Colin Frontjack, is there a longer term aim to build sort of a thematic style of play that passes from the first team all the way down the academy, and what does that style look like?
Yeah, I think that's got to be, across everything. I think when we first met, and we've discussed earlier before, there's got to be an identity or a North Star, for want of a less cheesy term, that we all try and strive for. And I think that's what's got to be driven by what we think the fans want to see, and hopefully that's something that I have a good indication of. But I've also, since I started here already, spoken to numerous people that have a not long affiliation with the club, both inside it and outside it, to get their take on what they think that style needs to be. I think Worthy's already doing a good job with that at the academy. Like I said, when I go down there and watch the team, it's an enjoyable watch. It's a front foot, all action, attacking, committed style, and they play with a passion and emotion. And I think for Town fans, that's what they want to see. I very rarely go out, and speak to people and they say, what I like is 4-2-3-1 or 3-4-3. It's not formations. It's not really a style of play. It's a feeling, and I think it's a passion and an emotion and an intensity that we've got to play with. So that's going to be the task from first team right down to academy. But I think once we establish that and we start building that, we can then point everything at that in terms of how we recruit, how we train the players, how we condition the players, how we are medically, what we do from a player welfare perspective across from all age groups really. So that's a big point of emphasis, and hopefully a big part of my role in the next few years.
And one for you, Liam, from Abe Richards. He says that he's the coach of an under-9s football team. As someone who has worked, as you say, in academy football, what habits are you looking to get into kids that age, or perhaps a bit older if that's where your experience lies, that then translate into success in senior football?
Yeah, no, I did quite a few years part-time. My first full-time coaching job was under 8s to under 12s. So did a few years at that, and I absolutely loved it, and I still do, to be fair, when I get around those age groups, just in terms of just the pure love of the game, just the energy, the innocence. They've not been tainted and scarred by the industry yet, so it's quite nice to get around them. So my biggest bit, it would definitely be, job as a coach is definitely to inspire a love of the game. Don't knock that by spending too much time talking to the kids at 8 you want to play. And there's certain elements that even now with the seniors that I actually use that we did with 8-year-olds around making things competitive. I think you get the best out of people, and you start playing football not because you want to complete a pattern or have control of a game. You want to attack, you want to score goals, and you want to create goals. So for me, it's inspire love of the game. Let the kids play, bring out competition, and just for me, teach them some really good behaviours around discipline and respect and hard work. And I think they're foundations that will set kids up, whatever walk of life they go into, will allow them to be a success. So for me, it's very much that behaviour development and making sure they love what they do.
We've only got a few minutes left. I don't want to leave it though, Chris, without talking about the women's team.
Yeah.
Who Richard Kosmala has asked about them. Obviously, they've been sort of integrated into the club alongside the men's side, which I think is fantastic development. How do you intend to sort of keep them moving forward? Is there funding from the club? What's the ambition there?
Yeah, absolutely. There's funding from the club. It's something that Kevin's very passionate about. I think actually the American model of women's sports is something that we could probably have learned a lot from a while ago. So he's really passionate about that. I've been lucky to have worked in the women's game when I was at the FA, so it means a lot. Yeah, we definitely have a plan of how we want to progress that, both at senior level. Obviously, we're right at the top of the league at the moment, and also, again, like we just spoke about there, academy level. And over the next few years, we want to make sure that hopefully comes in house at the right time as well. And it's around making sure we're deliberate in the next steps of the women's team. So yeah, we're really pleased to have that on board, and it's a really exciting part of the club.
Fantastic. I'll come to you for this one first, Liam. What was your biggest surprise, positive and negative, when you first started at Huddersfield Town? That's from Mark Matthew.
Yeah, I think I've had a few moves now, so it takes probably quite a lot to surprise me. I think.
Yeah.
For me, clubs are built on people. So the stadium's incredible. The workspaces. Having been around some of the lounges and the changing room, fantastic. But the big, was it a surprise? No, but I think in terms of once you get to know the people, I think I've been really, really pleased with some of the people here. I think in terms of the investment, how much people care, how people are willing to go above and beyond what's asked of them. The passion, the emotion of the fans and their level of investment. I think across the club and everyone associated with it, so desperate for success. I think that's the bit that, again, is probably what resonates with me, because I'm in a similar position off the back of, as I said earlier, a challenging period. I'm the same. I'm hungry for some success, and again, I think that's probably what's hit me across so many people associated with the club.
And Chris, obviously you're returning to the club.
Yes.
Is there anything that's changed that's taken you
Yeah, I
back
think
up?
probably for me, obviously, I hopefully knew the people side of it, and knew that would be a big draw for anybody coming here. I think what surprised me compared to where I was before was the level of infrastructure since I left. Obviously, I know it got a promotion to the Premier League and the investment that came with that, but you can really tell, like I said, the office spaces, the ground, or how it's looking now. But the main place for us every day is Canalside, and I think going back to that, it's a top Championship facility already, and I think we want to, that's something that should help us attract players and build our overall feeling of where this club can get to, and the standard of what we're trying to achieve. In terms of negatives, you did. I need some tips from you how to manage them. But yeah, in terms of that, I think it's more not looking at those as an opportunity. I do think there's an opportunity to be more aligned in what we do. And I think when I left here last time, when David was in charge, that was probably the point when I've been at the club. There was the clearest identity of what the playing style was. I think over the previous years, obviously been a lot of different managers and maybe stylistically going from different ends of the spectrum. So I think I view that it's not as a negative as such, but an opportunity for us to build something that might be a bit more sustainable over time. And that for me is a huge exciting part of why I came back here. Look, if everything had been great and they'd have been in upper half of the Championship, it might not have been us two sat here. We're joining at the right time of the journey, and it certainly reflects a lot of that in our conversations that we've had so far.
I suppose one of the difficulties for you both is trying to balance that up. You want those longer term objectives and getting everything sort of lined up for a few years down the line. At the end of the day, you want to get promoted this season as well.
Absolutely.
It's always a balance, I suppose, in football. But how do you tackle that conflict between short, medium, long term?
I don't really feel like I've got to that point yet. Since I joined, there's been quite a lot going on. I think I've spoken about, I'm really looking forward to this bit now about being able to think strategically. Feel like obviously the window's shut, we've got the coaching staff settled, and for me, I can hopefully now start looking ahead to the summer and beyond, both in the academy, in the women's and the men's first team. So I think for me, that's what I'm looking forward to, starting to build those out, whilst also making sure that Liam and the staff have got everything they need for the short term and ultimately the results which are going to get us promoted, which is what everybody wants.
Is that one of the benefits for you, Liam, of having Chris in this role, that it does allow you to concentrate on, we always say the game by game thing, allows you to keep more of your focus on that?
Yeah, definitely. I think we all have a certain amount of energy, right? I think it allows me to shift a lot more of my energy into starting tomorrow. The game by game, but at the same point, obviously, I have a certain amount of energy where we're having chats around, what do we want the team to look like? What is it? Planning for certain scenarios in the future is just how much energy you put there. I don't have to put as much, just obviously because Chris can take a lot of that on. So I think in terms of when you look at it, I've always been very much try to leave the place better than you found it, and that. I think in terms of for all of us, right, there'll be people, associating, supporting the club long beyond us. So for me, while we're here, it's our duty ultimately to give everything to try and make it better, to improve things and leave things in, like I said, a better place than what you found it.
And ultimately, it's all for, you want to leave it there for the fans, don't you? I mean, Phoebe Connor asks Chris, and you talked about this when you talked about the academy, but is what the fans want, is what they think important in shaping the team's mentality, and how does that work in the dressing room as well, Liam, in a moment?
Yeah, I think what we want to do is give them something to be proud and get behind. I've got quite specific views on this in terms of I do think it's our obligation to give them something to get behind. Obviously there'll be times where things have been like we've relied on them in the games, in the early games, the Bradford and the Luton games, to help get us over the line, and they were great at that. But overall, as an overarching thing, I think we spoke about this to the players the other day, is around it. It's our duty to make sure that we give them something to get behind. So I see it as certainly my role to recruit and build and evolve a team and a culture that allows us to consistently do that as much as we can. It's going to take a while, like it's not something that you can click your fingers and that happens overnight. And also there are going to be games where maybe it doesn't look so much as that. But that's what we want to build towards, that we can do that more consistently. I do take it as a really, heavy part of the role really is giving the fan base what they want and giving them something that they can be proud of and get behind. I think that's a huge part of the motivation that gets me out of bed every day.
Does that enter into your thoughts, Liam, at all?
Yeah, definitely. We've spoken about it before, right? I think when I look at the atmosphere in the games we've had here, it's been incredible. I think it's how do we create that over and over and over again, and that the big bit we can control is how we apply ourselves, our attitude, how do we play, what's our style like. We're not always going to get it right, and that's where again I think you do have to earn credit over time by the performances you put in, and earning almost elements probably with some of the scarring here of the trust of the fans that we are going to continually do that. Like I said, we're not always going to get it right and wrong. If you look across a 50-game season, we're going to have bad performances, but we shouldn't ever have bad application, and that's the bit that you can control. So for me, it's very much that. Look, we're desperate to have the fans on board, and the way we do that is by the way we apply ourselves and the type of football that we play. And the biggest bit, by winning games. And again, I think, previous club I've been at with certain frustrations and, for a sustained period of time, the biggest thing that shifted that was one, showing how much we cared, but also then winning games in a certain way. And the more we do that, the more credit we can earn.
Okay. Moving away from sort of the generalities and more into specifics about what's happening at the moment, Liam. Lee Grant put in place sort of a leadership group. I think one or two of those players that were in that group have departed the club since then. Is that something that you are keen to carry forward, and we spoke about this in the press conference earlier, but is that something that needs to come from everyone and the players know who the leaders are? Maybe you don't need that formal structure there.
Yeah, no, I will do. I haven't done anything on it yet. I think it's hard to create a leadership group when I don't know the characters and the personalities. Sure. So for me, it's very much that. It's getting to know them. And a leadership group, everyone immediately jumps to, you've got to have what you perceive as your best leaders, but it's not that for me. I think you have to cover the changing room. So I think you have to have some older lads, some younger lads, some more experience, some people that play and not play. And I think you have to cover the whole changing room to be effective with it, and then definitely use it. I think it's not just about managing the changing room; it's about on pitch. How do we shift momentum? How do we get a hold of games? How do we refocus after scoring or conceding? Is the bits I've spoken to you about in the press of players owning things. It's a lot easier if you've got a collective doing it, and leaders look in many different ways. I think you've got the verbal ones, the screamers, the showers. I think you've got the other ones then that are maybe more calm and composed and support in different ways. I think you've also then got people that are just willing to take responsibility, and that's another form of leadership. So, still working through that process of who I think will make up that group. But for me, it'll be a really, really important piece to get right, and then obviously we'll do a huge amount of work on it.
Yeah, thank you to Andrew Nestor for that last question. This is from Chris Beaumont, Liam. This is very specific and tactical, but he's asked, what is your opinion on the effectiveness of zonal marking? I know Matt Glennon from Radio Leeds is quite outspoken on this.
Full zonal?
Against. He's against.
Right, no, for me, you'll see on our setups, we tend to be hybrid, which is a mixture of zonal and man marking. So I think the reason for the combination of two, areas that people will target, and then I think in terms of then with the markers, you can try and prevent and block, as you see obviously so often now. I think that's why it's a combination of the two. But the game evolves, and I think we have to evolve with it as well. So I think it's bits that we're talking around constantly at the minute around how do we collect information to go right. What's can we improve it? Can we make it better? Where are we strong? Where are we, maybe a little bit weaker? How do we change it? And that's why for me we've got the system that we've been using. But again, I think it's something that might evolve in the future.
I always think with zonal, it's one of those things where you see the goals that go in because of it, but no one sees the goals, particularly that get prevented. Because
you highlight the mistake in it rather than you might have actually defended 8 or 9 extremely well. I think that's it's with everything, right? We analyse everything when it goes right and wrong.
Yeah. And Chris, what do you think is the focus for the rest of this season now? Where are you putting, all your eggs from now on?
As I've said before, clearly the main thing is to be promoted, and that's what we're focusing on right now. And hopefully we're in a position, both on and off the pitch, where we can build towards that. But in terms of my longer focus. It is around building some more of those performance services around and making sure that we're aligned to the future direction that we want to travel on the field. Certainly, we've only been working together for 6 games, so it'll be as much of us constantly making sure we're aligned and checking in. And I think another important part is challenging each other in the right way. So the way that our relationship evolves will be really important. Yes, that's from a first team perspective. I think, you know, the short term, but then I'm also now starting to be able to get a bit of time and space to look at what summer looks like. Like I said, both leagues and both challenges that will bring, really. So it's I'm actually really enjoying, you know, having stepped straight into the middle of a really hectic time, which was necessary, and I really relished it. But now I'm also looking forward at the other side of my role, which is stepping back, looking a little bit more calmly and more strategic at the whole club, and that for me is the excitement with the weekly challenge of winning as many games as possible and getting promoted.
Liam, you're a few weeks in, and as we touched on, you've had some very different kinds of opposition to talk about, to prepare to face, I should say. Do you feel like you're still in a learning phase with these players at the moment, or is it now at the point where it's like, right, I know what this lad can do, I know what this lad can do, or is it one of those things you're always learning?
Yeah, you're constantly gathering information, so I'd definitely say with the different experiences we've had so far, we've definitely done a lot of learning. But again, I think when it's such a small sample of games to actually go, right, that's definite, I think you have to be a little bit careful. I think, you know, especially what pressure does to people, how they perform. With us being new in, you might get people that elevate their performance and get what everyone talks around, the new manager bounce, right? I think so. It's then, you know, how can people sustain certain levels, certain performances over a period of time, and that's the big bit for me. I think it's always the challenge when you come in, you know, at the stage we have of you're coming into a group that's obviously had a large amount of work put into them in a certain way. We'll have our ideas that might have certain similar things, but certain things that are different. We have to be a little bit careful of what do we introduce, and do we completely change that? Do we, you know, leave that for the time period? Mainly, we don't have training time, as we spoke about earlier. So I think it's a constant juggling act, and it's constantly learning that, you know, like I said, we've had in the 4 weeks, I think we've only had maybe 1 or 2 training weeks. So it's very, very small amount of time in the grass, especially with how we work, not knowing how players are able to transfer, you know, the training that we do into the game. It is a real hard one at the minute, given that we've had so many games. So they're bits that, again, I think will definitely evolve over time, and that's the exciting bit with the group. I think there's so much potential left in this group, but then beyond that, obviously the progress that we can make in, you know, adding other bits in other areas for sure.
Because I think some fans don't realise when you're playing sort of Saturday, Tuesday, you've got little to no time on the grass with them, have you? It ends up.
Yeah, and we try to be creative with it. I know a lot of people do what they call a second day recovery. We're on the grass. We have to maximise the time we have. So like today, for example, we were out on the grass doing. You have to be a little bit careful with, you know, how hard you push them, but we're out working. We're doing certain things with the ball and certain pressing actions and other bits and pieces that we feel they need. So again, it's the beauty of probably the Football League, having worked abroad as well, the intensity of it and what, you know, a one good week can do in terms of the buzz it can give, the big shifts in the league, what that can do. But again, I think it's very much, you have to be creative with your coaching, so we have to be smart with what video do we show, how do we walk through things, what sessions do we deliver it, it challenges us as coaches to make sure that we give the lads, you know, not everything, but the most important information they need to be best prepared for a game.
I'm interested to know how much of your approach is sort of that. I know you don't want to rule out anything in terms of that automatic promotion, and you don't want to assume you're necessarily going to, you know, there's a lot of work to do to get that top 6, but how much of your thinking is about developing a side that you feel like if you do end up in the playoffs, you can get through that campaign successfully?
I think first and foremost, all my energy has to go into trying to achieve that. Yeah, that's the number one. That's the reason I joined. I think all the work that we do is to prep, and one for tomorrow, starting off on that, but then keep building on some really strong habits. And again, like I said, I think coming in, obviously we caught up and watched a huge amount of previous games to kind of build pictures, tapped into people's knowledge in terms of had seen the team and been around the team and what their thoughts were and what was good, what was not good, what would you change. Obviously I've got my principles and staff's principles around what's important, so there's the blend of how do we win now, and what things do we introduce that are going to allow us to continue winning, but also then, you know, beyond that, you know, wherever we may be, continually evolving, rather than this is it to the end of the season, complete overhaul, and then you change in the summer. For me, it's very much that we're introducing key principles now, but not all of them. I think that's the key bit.
Because you don't know, do you, injuries and players coming back from injury and etc. It's pretty amorphous, isn't it?
Yeah, and even in the performance stuff, I watched some of the games prior, and the team were quite deep for me, which, as you've probably hopefully seen in some of the games, we want to try and engage and press higher and do that. But I think naturally when you've been playing quite deep, to then being asked to do something completely different, it doesn't always click, which is why it looks right and wrong at times. And that's why then behind the scenes we show them what good looks like, and when it's not quite right, we show them that to say, look, next time think like it's this, it's that, to solve, to help coach them and solve the problem. So there's so many areas where that we can affect. Like you said, we can show them the video. The challenge at the minute is then to go and replicate it on the grass at the minute. So they're the bits that between now and what we've got 11 weeks left is to keep pushing and reintegrating understanding and learning habits of the identity piece that we want to create.
Habits key, isn't it? Because as you sort of touch on there, and we talked about on our podcast a lot of players, particularly those who have played at, have a long history at League One, they might not have played at clubs that have that high pressing approach, or they might not have played at clubs who like to, be a bit more intricate with the ball. Is it about getting those new habits into them? Is that half the battle as a coach?
Yeah, definitely. Habit forming is massive for me. Even on the behaviour stuff, I've banged on about a lot since I've been here. I think that in terms of the intensity you work, the focus you have, the willingness to run back every single time, that's habits, and that it's not so much tactical. That's just a mindset of understanding that you have to do it and you have to be willing to do it. So we're constantly doing that, and then it's teaching around game understanding when they do certain things on the pitch, why they're doing it, and that's a lot of the work that we do. That again takes probably a little bit of time, because for me, we're asking the lads to make decisions, and then naturally when they get it wrong, the impact can obviously be poor, but then we coach them, and that for me why a core part of our programme is around development and how we improve.
For you, Chris, was it really gratifying that Liam gets off to starts off by getting victories over Bradford, Luton, the kind of teams that unfortunately earlier in the season you weren't beating those teams who were sort of up in that promotion picture? Is that part of the reason that you wanted to make the change? And it must be very encouraging to have got those results so early on.
Yeah, I think it was part of the reason why I wanted to make the change, and obviously those results enabled us to build a bit of momentum that hopefully we can continue between now and the end of the season. I think what was also encouraging for me, and just touched on it briefly there, is like the way that we won those games. It wasn't the typical way to win games against the teams. Hopefully we don't have to keep doing that with 10 men. But actually some of the things that we did show in those games, the suffering, the resilience, the finding a way to win, when you come down to the crunch points towards the end of the season, and we've all been in playoff campaigns, and those can be things that really make the difference. And for us to be able to get those, we've spoken about this, the experiences of getting those things under our belt and proving and showing that we can win in different ways, was just as important as that. Now obviously we want to make sure that performances are consistent as well, and I know that's something Liam's big on. But it was obviously the fact that it was those teams was great, but it was also the way that we did it, and also how fast the fans bought onto that, and almost that proving that some of the things that they want to see, those basics that I mentioned, fight, passion, hunger, they were evident for everybody to see straight from minute one, and that was probably the most gratifying thing.
I think you and I had a similar take, Liam, on Saturday's game, which is the fight was really, really there. It was maybe the quality just didn't emerge out of the side. Is that something you can coach when you're looking for that moment of sort of technique, that quality from a player, or is that something where it's like, you know what, I've got good players, I just need to give you license and you need to provide it?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, we're talking here about identity. I think for me, the job is the players need to know their role in all phases of the game. If we're pressing, what do you do? If you're defending the box, what do you do? If we're attacking, what do you do? If we're building up from the goal, what do you do? And I think the challenge you then get is you've got another team trying to impose their style on the game. And that's, hence you referenced Peterborough, we go away and there's a certain way, it's our style versus theirs, who comes out on top. And what we want to create is a team that across the course of the season, it's our team. But within certain games, as you know, in League One, with the difference in resources and what that does to styles and way teams try to get success, you then have to be adaptable. And that's probably the biggest difference, I'd say, in League One, is that you're at Peterborough and at Cardiff with a certain style, and then a week later you're at two teams that are playing a completely different style. It's then how do you manage that? How do you find a way to win? We spoke about it. I think for the weekend, you have to match the fight, but then you have to then impose your quality. And again, I think if you just go straight away, we're going to go and impose our style on them. You can easily then get, for me, probably beat up a little bit and not get success. It's then how do you match that and then fight to put your style on the game, which for us was try and take a bit more care when we did land on second balls. How do we then control it and connect passes to get people up the pitch so you can attack? And that's the bit that we started to do first half, but then couldn't get going second half.
I think one of the other big players, we've got a question about zonal marking here. We don't have one about playing out from the back, which again I know has been. Some people like it, some people don't. Some people struggle to see the value. I know you, Liam, said you want your players when you first arrived. You want your players looking for the forward pass if it's on first and foremost. Is that right?
Yeah, I think possession for me personally gets miscoached quite a lot in kids. Yeah. I think you should be taught to think and not necessarily play. I think that's the key bit, is to think and look in behind the opposition's back line. Your furthest forward plays feet, if not, and then square and then back. And I think too often that order gets jumbled in young players. I think building up from the back, I think, is a key one. I think it depends on, one, the profile you've got, and two, how you control games. So for me, the whole point of if you're building is to progress into the attacking half. Now you can do that long, landing on second balls. You can do it by kicking, in an open structure long and landing on it by controlling space. And you can do it by playing short. And I think that's the bit in terms of the feeling in game. If you just kick long and they're winning, then you might have to change in terms of the way that you do it. So for me, it's very much that. The whole point and how we'll coach the lads is to progress it, but for me, it's doing it in different ways. Is it short? Is it long? Or is it long into a closed structure? And again, I think they're the bits that for me haven't been priority at the minute, mainly because of where the group have been at and what we felt we needed to focus on more than anything. So we will do it at times, but again, I think for me, it's ratios in the games, it's feeling the momentum in the game, and then it's understanding what the opposition do and why you're doing it.
I think sort of tying into that, our final question from Marcus Lodge. He says, what does success look like for the club over the next 3 years? And Chris, I'll come to you first on that. What's your vision? Obviously, we know what the objective is for this season. We talked about that. But over the next few years, what represents success for Huddersfield Town?
I think, first of all and foremost, clearly that is promotion. We want to get promotion to Championship as soon as we can, and then ideally become stable in there and prove that we can compete at that level. Ideally, that would be with a certain identity on the field that we're trying to build towards, as we've said, over these next few transfer windows. I think that's important to us as well, so you can start seeing that we are aligning everything that we do at Canalside towards being successful at playing that way. Also, obviously, in the men's first team, women's first team, and academy, we've touched on. I think progression for them into the third tier, and certainly some, bringing the academy in on board and being more deliberate about that and continuing to see progression there would be good. And I think, as we mentioned the academy. I think we've already seen some encouraging signs there. But if we can see more EFL minutes from some of our players over these next few years, have them being, keep developing that competitiveness as they are. The form at the minute in the academy for the 21s particularly and the 18s is becoming to be pretty good. So if we can be competitive within those games, it shows that we're developing the right skill sets, and then get them in and around our first team and other EFL first teams, whether that's development, loans, and trying to be deliberate around that. So I think there's a lot of room to grow and progress, and that's for me the exciting part. And over the next 3 years, hopefully we can have some sustained growth in all three of those areas. That's the challenge.
For you, Liam, you've been at clubs in League One, in the Championship. You've had your successes as well previously. Do you feel like this is a club that, and we're talking here about what does success look like? Step one of that is getting into the Championship. Do you feel this is a club with the infrastructure it's got and what you've seen and the investment from the owner? This is a club that can succeed in the Championship.
Yeah, definitely. That was the biggest appeal I think for joining. When you look at infrastructure, when you look at, I think fan base is important, and the support that the club can get. I think that's another key part. I think when you look at the investment from the owner in terms of building a squad that's capable of doing that, I think it's hugely important. So definitely, I think when it's set, it's ready to go. We've now got to do everything this season to try and get it there, and then see where we're at. And if worst case it doesn't happen, then in terms of build a team that's capable of doing it. Because I do think when you look at it, there's so much potential in terms of across the whole club. And that's the bit that excites me more than anything. And I know lots made around playing styles and identity, which don't get me wrong is really important, and we have to have that. But I think the biggest bit that excites me is let's win as many games as we can and create some special memories. Because when you do look back at things that the club here has achieved, people will be talking about the memories or the Peterborough away, what it was like in the away end when you score a last minute winner to get it over the line. They're the bits that you remember more than anything. So for me, it's let's try and create some special memories in the next few years.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Thank you to Chris and to Liam for joining me this evening, and thank you to everyone who sent in questions once again. I'm afraid that's all we have time for this evening, but appreciate sharing your insights, and thank you to our supporters who have tuned in and who sent so many brilliant questions. Have a good evening, and see you next time.